Oh, hello, hello, and welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about literally everything under the sun as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I am Mo Berkner-Boyd. I'm the founder of the Moxie Exchange and the Everyday Inclusion app. I am a white woman with mid-length curly red hair. I'm rocking some red frames. I've got on a green shirt, and behind me I have a gray wall. I'm super excited on 420 to be having a conversation with you, Erin. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and we're going to talk a lot about equity and economic access, mobility, economic equity. It's going to be a great conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Erin Horn McKinney. I serve as the inaugural National Executive Director for Howard University National Center, or it's the Howard University and PNC National Center for Entrepreneurship, based in Washington, D.C., but our work is national, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But I'll just do a quick descriptor for myself. I am a Black woman with mid-length gray hair, black and white glasses, and my hair has a cute little black headband, leather headband, and I am wearing a green and beige and black jacket with some gold zipper and buttons on it that are kind of snazzy, if I must say so myself.
Love it, love it, love it.
Oh, and my background.
Yeah.
My background, by the way, is the campus of Howard University. I have a virtual background with our flagpole that stands. So it has our founders library in the background with a nice blue sky, which is for Howard. That's called our hilltop. And so the founders library sits on a hilltop on the main campus with the flagpole in the front.
So talk about this inaugural role. And you know what I think is interesting, Erin, when we look at your career, you've had diversity, equity, and inclusion threaded through that. And now here you are in this inaugural role.
Yeah. And well, that's interesting because, and I have had a lot of inaugural roles, not intentionally, but I think for good reason. I like building things and creating things. You know, I think when I was a kid, I said I wanted to be an artist and a creative and that sort of thing. And it's funny how you can be that in economic development, right? And so a lot of times I'm creating and have a vision, and then I like actually make it happen. And I didn't realize that until which I'll talk about in a minute, a little bit more about my background. But at one point, when I was working in the mayor's office in DC, running technology, inclusion and innovation efforts for the city and entrepreneurship. And we had created this tech corridor, the first in Washington, D.C., and it just happened to run on the same street that my son's middle school was on. And at 11, we were driving past one of the flagpoles that had the sign, and he said, "How cool is that you get to change a city?" And I thought, I never thought about it that way, but out of the mouths of babes, right? So let me tell you a little bit about this work and how meaningful and impactful it is and how unique it is. First, in 2021, PNC National Center for Entrepreneurship. Can you still hear me? Did I lose you?
Yeah, I was getting a little bit of a lag time there. I don't know if it was on your side or mine.
You know, isn't technology great until it isn't?
It is. It is. So, as an accidental tech CEO, I always appreciate technology when it does fun things. And, you know, I also remember dial-up internet. So
yeah, right. Life before internet. You know, I didn't realize how far we in technology until I walked past an old telephone booth with one of my younger son, and he said, "What is that?" And I thought, that's how old I am, right? Anyway, so I'll start from the beginning because I don't know what was lost. But in 2021, PNC Bank's foundation awarded Howard a historical grant of $16.8 million over 5 years to create a National Center for Black and HBCU Entrepreneurship. So what does that mean? It means that essentially PNC was investing in and providing the initial seed funding to create an innovative and national entrepreneurial network across all HBCUs, as well as across the country, using HBCUs as really like the backbone. But this is not just an initiative that is at HBCUs. It's for any Black entrepreneur across the country. It's multi-generational, it's industry agnostic, so interdisciplinary. And it's also, it just is no matter what your industry, what age you are, or as a family, the center is for you. And it really is to create a national resource hub to say, here are all the resources you need, no matter what stage you are in your business. And we're, localizing that information to you and pointing you in the right direction. And we do this in partnership with 3 other universities so that we have 4 regional hubs under this national center. So Howard serves as the umbrella based at Howard. And then there's a regional center at Howard, a regional center at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Clark Atlanta University, and then Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas. And then each of those regional centers works within a 4 to 5 state footprint across the South, primarily where HBCUs exist. And then in the North, where there are not HBCUs, that's where the National Center comes in, and we are creating strategic partners across the country. And so we're piloting really cool programs with the National Center to make sure that these programs are not predatory, and creating this best practice and then sending it out across the network. It's kind of just a quick way to explain it.
Which is incredibly exciting.
And a heavy lift. So I like to say we're building, we're building the plane while flying it, right? Is a saying that people say, but in this case, we're building the rocket ship while flying it, and we're about to go into warp speed. So there's a lot happening here.
And I love that you are industry agnostic. So many of resources like this are tech focused. And so for example, I'm thinking about a woman that I know, Erin, who she and her husband live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They left their corporate jobs to start a welding and machine shop to build generational wealth in Black families, in particular women, getting them trained up and skilled. They would be perfect. Yep. I'm gonna make an introduction.
You absolutely should. And so here's the thing I want to make sure that people are clear about. This is brand spanking new, right? So like we received the money in 2021, end of 2021. I was hired at the beginning of the school year, this current school year. So the 2022, 2023 school year, we've just been putting infrastructure in place, launching some of our initial efforts, because we have all of our deliverables for this grant fall under 5 strategic pillars. That's research, resources, programs, curriculum and education, and then access to capital. And so that is a lot of work. So hiring staff, putting together just basic systems. I mean, that stuff takes a lot of time, and then do that in university context. I can only, you're with me, right? It's not as easy as it sounds. But then additionally, so kind of what we've done is, you can't just start an initiative and really a movement. This is a economic transformational movement that we're doing, similar to, speaking of kind of like how all of my work has fallen within diversity, equity, inclusion. It really just comes from being an activist. And I just returned from spring break, like many folks in universities or many people everywhere, right? People have kids and are on spring break. And I went to Memphis, Tennessee, which is where my father's family hails from on both sides, with some mentors of mine. And we went to the National Civil Rights Museum. And I've gone to that museum maybe about 3 or 4 times in my life, the first time being in high school during a Black college tour. But so I've seen the progression of this museum be built out. And one of the things they have fairly recently added was really focusing on exactly where Martin Luther King was in this movement right before he passed away. He was getting ready to launch this whole poor people's movement, right? And I feel like it was very serendipitous to be there at this time, because what I feel like this work really picks off where that left off, which is really focusing on equitable equitable economics in our country, because at the end of the day, there's still this huge gap. We are, Black folks in this country are not financially free.
Yep.
And so that's what this work is really about.
So I think it's really, you and I scheduled this. And when we scheduled it, we were talking about April 20th. And then when I went and I looked at the calendar, I said, it's 4/20. What an interesting day for us to be having a conversation about economic equity. Particularly when we look at continued mass incarceration of, in particular, Black men, but Black men and women, for possession, not distribution, not possession of marijuana. Now, I am in Colorado. Colorado is one of the first states to legalize marijuana, and there's been a hell of a lot of money made by a lot of white men in this, on when we still have mass incarceration of Black men. Like it is this case study for what we are talking about with systemic economic inequity.
Mm-hmm. And I think it goes exactly to the point that I just made, that we're not free, right? We do still have a lot of individuals who are still incarcerated for, very harsh judgments that have been made, right? And throughout this kind of whole drug war, there's been a lot of issue around the laws that are passed that for someone who has crack cocaine, the punishments are much more severe than those with cocaine, right? Yep. And then it's the same with marijuana. And we've seen a lot of, interestingly, on a previous trip with these same mentors, we went to Montgomery, Alabama, and we went to the Equal Justice Institute, which EJI, and they have a museum there, which is the From Slavery to Mass Incarceration Museum, which is a very powerful museum. If you go there, you really see how, even though the population of Black people in this country is still relatively small, right? Less than 20%, and closer to 10%. Yet what we make up in the criminal system and in jails is, like higher than 60%. It's like the 60 to 80%, right? Right. Which just, and of course, there is that argument that's made, especially at that museum and where there are other advocates for that, around how related even to 4/20, but just in general, how many times people have been picked up and actually don't even have to have committed a crime. But if there is a quota that is trying to be met, perfect example is the Central Park Five in New York, that famous story of those young men. And, and after that horrific case, and those young men, from the time that they were children, being in jail for a crime that they did not commit because somebody wanted to have a big case so that they could have a political move, that they only receive, $4 million, right? And you think about, like, they lost their entire life.
Yep.
Right. And I think as a mother, I only have 2 children, and my 2 children are 2 Black male children. When I see movies like that, when I see movies like I just on the plane the other day watched Till, about the Emmett Till case, which is really about the mother, right?
Yeah.
I feel that much more charged up around the work that I do, because no matter what strides we think that we have made in this country, which is sad right now, we're in a situation where we're taking steps back, right? And so even in this country, as Colorado is one of the first to really create laws to make cannabis legal, DC obviously is also in that space. So we've seen more in DC, obviously just by population, that there have been a lot of Black entrepreneurs that are doing really well here. And there's been this movement and it's one space. But until we start seeing a shift in the numbers of our Black men who are incarcerated because of these, in this same space, we're not, we have to call out the hypocrisy in it.
Yes.
And I just don't think that there's enough advocacy on that standpoint.
Well, and I think like literally all of these things, I often recommend to people the book, Clint Smith, How the Word is Passed. Right. Are you familiar with it? Absolutely read it. Right. And it goes from, he starts with Monticello, right? All of the different places where people were enslaved, and threads through to today's, mass incarceration. And it is the threads over time, right? And I'm saying threads, the systems, right, that continue to produce the results that those systems were designed to produce. So I'm so excited for the work that you're doing in terms of what are the things that we can do to create new systems. Because when we talk about economic equity, right, whether it is bias in lending, maybe we could even just start there, the impact of redlining on home ownership, well, the impact of redlining on access to education, equitable education, right, access to home ownership, which is often the springboard to economic security, being able to get a loan based on, it can feel daunting.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. So my work is based technically in DC, although it again is national, but I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm from Minneapolis, which is home of George Floyd, right? And it took a Black man dying, and only because we were all standing still due to COVID, we even paid attention to it, because it's not like he's the first Black man to die, and he's not the first Black man to die in that way. But because it was with technology, people were able to see it, and it's no longer someone trying to say that it's made up, right? Like somebody made a story or it exaggerated a story, right? But there was over $400 billion of funding committed by corporations and the philanthropic community. And here we are 3 years, almost exactly 3 years later after his death. Only a small percentage of those funds have actually been deployed. But what it also tells you is that, one, that money could have been deployed at any point, right? That money was already there. So we know this exists. And that there continues to be these, press releases and photo ops, but without real action, right? And when we look at right now, as we are dealing with a financial crisis in our country, and when we have there's massive layoffs that are happening, especially at tech companies. And when you look at who is getting laid off, oftentimes it is people of color first.
Absolutely.
Women and people of color. And so, but even with COVID and women having to step away and school their children from home, do online learning, a lot of people had to step into entrepreneurship to either supplement income or just to work at all, because not everybody, most people in the country didn't have that luxury of just working remotely.
Right.
So what do we do in those situations? And I feel like what this time and this moment has forced us to look at is that ownership really is the only way. Even if you work for an employer, even if you're now with inflation and things like that, people feel like they've arrived a bit because they're making six figures, but that's really not real wealth, right? Especially if you're still living paycheck to paycheck. And when you have some tech CEOs who make there's one that comes to mind who makes $165 million a year, right?
Well, and that is when you truly look at executive compensation, their salary is not the big number. Their salary is not the big number. So even that's appalling.
Right.
Right. That is appalling. And it's not even, that's the tip of that person's compensation.
Right, exactly. Right. There's so much more to that compensation. And there's the stock and the ownership and things like that.
And the bonus and the
bonus, right. And and then there's so many things that, to your point, the way that the systems are set up in this country around finance and around credit and around redlining and all these things that continue to keep communities of color behind. And even if we do in some sort of way figure it out and say, okay, we're going to move like this, and all of a sudden the rules change, right? What we're advocating for through this work is build your own table, right? Stop trying to join a table that doesn't welcome you. We do need to go back to an effort where we're keeping Black dollars in Black communities longer, and no one is going to save us. And that's just the truth of the matter. And that it does take a collective and combined effort. We cannot function from a scarcity mindset where we get pitted against each other. So, perfect example, HBCUs traditionally have not worked together, even on efforts like this, right? Because there has been organizations come in and they're like, okay, we're just going to fund one HBCU with an initiative.
Or right, here's our foundation for this.
Exactly. And then, and what real impact does that make? What's really different about the work that we're doing is not only are we working across all HBCUs and through these 4 hubs, but we're actually giving funding to those other schools as well, in 2 different ways. So just in the past 2 weeks, we gave $250,000 out to 10 HBCUs. So that was $25,000 grants each to HBCUs to activate entrepreneurial initiatives on their campus just to help. And this is an annual program that we'll be doing. So we had an RFP out for that. 10 schools across the country, 10 historically Black colleges and universities were awarded that funding. Additionally, we gave out about 8 or 9 faculty fellowships of $10,000 for HBCU faculty who are doing research around Black entrepreneurship, right? Because in order for us to do advocacy work, we need the data. And Black entrepreneurial scholarship still lacks considerably. It's not been an area that has received a lot of support. So we're giving these faculty members funding to do the research. And then we're going to also, we just launched a program this week called HBCU Startup Scholars, which is giving $10,000 scholarships to students at HBCUs across the country so they can serve as ambassadors on their campuses and in their communities while receiving funding to support their business or to support their education, whatever. Everyone's situation is different. But we want to grow that, right? Where this sounds like it's not a lot of money. And in some ways it isn't, but we have to start somewhere. When
Absolutely.
Most of our HBCUs and most of our members of our community have been completely under-resourced, even from a business standpoint. So flipping that to the finance side with businesses, there continues to be not only discriminatory practices, but predatory practices. And so what we're trying to use this initiative is to show that not all money is good money, and that how can we make sure that the money that you do receive is authentic, it is, and really actually is there to support you and help you grow, and how not everybody needs venture capital, right? There are so many different ways to receive funding that a lot of businesses are not aware of. And it really just depends on what stage of business that you're in. And then separately, kind of under our access to capital pillar, help create a whole new generation of Black angel investors to be that friends and family round for businesses that currently don't exist, and help people who, it's easier many people don't realize it's easier to acquire a business than to start a business from scratch. But the financing is different, right?
Yep,
And so
yep.
just all of these things helping us solve these really big problems. And we can't do it overnight. It's going to be a phased approach to get there and to create these best practices to really help our community.
I'm curious. So first, I'm so excited. And I just appreciate, right, these issues weren't created overnight. And so they won't be solved overnight, and they're big and they're complex, but they don't get solved if people just throw up their hands, right? So I love it's big, it's gnarly, it's hard. We got to start somewhere, right? And you are started, you're activated, you're getting everything in place. Is the Divine Nine playing any role at this point?
Well, they absolutely will. I mean, we haven't activated the Divine Nine for those who aren't aware are the 9 Black fraternities and sororities, national Black fraternities and sororities that exist, which I'm a member of one, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority.
Of course, I knew. I would have guessed. I would have guessed.
So, but I have many members of my family that are in almost every Divine Nine organization that exists, and those fraternities and sororities, and what makes Black fraternities and sororities different than those that are predominantly white fraternities and sororities is how much those carry on past graduation. Those are very active organizations nationally and support our community. But absolutely, it is one of the things that what I've been excited about is that a lot of those organizations have taken on entrepreneurial right. initiatives in those organizations. And so how can we tap into that? Again, we're not fully there yet. We're actually just right now, we just finished our national launch of communicating our efforts by doing a national launch at each school. So over the last 3 weeks, yesterday was our very last one at Morgan State, but we started at Howard, went to Clark. We had TD Jakes at Howard on April 4th, who launched with us. And then John Hope Bryant helped our launch in Atlanta. And then we went to Texas and then came back to Baltimore yesterday. And it's just been a really exciting just to get the word out that this movement is kicked off and happening. And then part of those announcements included that we have our inaugural national conference that will be happening in Washington, D.C., June 14th through the 16th. And so we're now calling people to come and get involved and do that. And that's one of the things that we're expecting, reaching out to the Divine Nine and other organizations to participate and support. How do we do that? Because we will not have real economic freedom until we start really coming together as a collective. And I think we can all agree that as a basic necessity, we all need money, right, to survive in a capitalist society.
So what is the role of a white corporate executive?
With our work or just in general?
I mean, we could go on for
and I'm happy to touch on both. Quickly, I will say, related to our work, is that one of the things that we'll be working on is supplier diversity with companies, right? One of the things I talk about everywhere I go is that one of the very first things you can do is realize the power of your dollar as an individual and from the company that you work within. As an individual, buying Black, supporting Black businesses, we can be very intentional about that. And sometimes people don't realize just those small investments. If you just carve out a certain percentage of your budget and say, I'm going to buy, support Black businesses with that, what that can mean to businesses. And it's the same for corporate, for companies, right? Where if you could say, all right, a certain percentage of our diversity supplier effort is going to go to Black businesses. Now, here's something interesting that only just in the last year has happened, which is there always have been initiatives around or efforts to support women entrepreneurs, because there's women business centers, there are minority business development centers across the country. There's yet to be Black business development centers, or even certifications, national certifications for Black businesses, right? And the reason that's really an important point to drive home is because oftentimes diversity issues, and especially economically, are solved with white women.
White women, right.
Or people of color that are not Black. So by the time those resources get to Black entrepreneurs, they're diluted, right? Yep. And so there's not a lot, and there still isn't. So the U.S. Black Chamber actually has been working with the federal government, and just in the last year has started a certification for Black businesses. So you can go to the U.S. Black Chamber website now, or U.S. Black Chamber, I'm sorry, and get that actual go through that process of certification. And then when you look at that, okay, so that means even related to the resources, it's made it really hard from a supplier diversity standpoint to say, all right, what percentage? You can't just say we're going to have, a 30% spend with diverse small businesses. You need to be very specific and say there needs to be Black-owned businesses. Obviously, the other thing corporations can do is really take a look at their hiring and their leadership, and companies brag about their percentage of hiring, and then you look at it and they're including the janitors and the administrative staff, which is important, right? But if we're not involved in leadership, or we're not on the boards of these companies, then we're really not having any significant change.
Right. I appreciate that. Right. The tangible things that people can be doing.
And you know what, can I follow up to just say, even outside of work, which, but it's still, because corporate executives tend to be leaders in their communities, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that we are in places and spaces where we sit on for-profit or nonprofit boards. The other thing that folks can do are be allies and make sure that we are advocating in that same way. Serena Williams' husband was on the board of Reddit, and he gave up his spot and said, I want a Black board member in this seat, right? Yep. And there's opportunities like that when you're in places and spaces to be the voice, to be the ally. That's real allyship.
Yep.
Not just putting a Black square on social media.
Yeah, right. Hashtag Black Lives Matter and my work is done.
and wear a t-shirt. And I mean, that doesn't do anything. Yep. What are you doing that makes very intentional, real, and authentic change?
We could go on, Erin. I knew, I'm looking at the time. We'll put the link to the conference in June in the comments. I'll find that.
Well, yeah, it's not posted yet, but you can put our website in there, which is, and folks can follow us, right? So it's the hupncenter.org. The link for that will be launching in the next week or so.
Great.
For that. So thank you for sharing that. But people can also follow us on social under HUPNC Center or Howard University and PNC Center.
Perfect. Great. Is there anything, well, leave me with one last truth bomb about all of this, about economic equity, about the work you're doing. You pick which mic you want to drop.
Well, I will say this, my mic drop is that the Black entrepreneurial revolution will.
I can't believe we froze up on your mic drop. Okay. My mic drop is start over.
Yeah, right, exactly. It was like a nice pause. Now the mic drop is that the Black entrepreneurial revolution will be televised, and that people will, like, you will see this happen. You will see a movement, and it will be visual. It'll be on your social media. It will be on television. We're going to start see some real shifts in this movement. And so fair warning, right? Because the movement is coming.
Fantastic. I'm glad it will be televised. And again, those of us that have privilege, what are we doing to add the spotlights? Right.
Right.
And add the electricity to, right, that we have access to.
And just for those who are not familiar, that comes from that whole song that the revolution will not be televised. And I'm just playing on that it will be this
Yep.
particular one, this entrepreneur one, for those who are not familiar, for clarification.
Erin, thank you. Thank you. And I wanted everybody to know what you're up to, so that they could support, so they can lean in, that they can be a part of making this change. Incredibly, incredibly exciting, right? Building your own table. Let's go.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me and you using this platform to really give voice to a lot of important work that's happening around the country.
And y'all, I have to give one shout out because Erin was talking about spending money at Black-owned businesses. So any of the books that we referenced, if you're getting a copy of Clint Smith's How the Word is Passed, y'all, if you're a part of this community, my favorite Black woman-owned bookstore is Urban Reads in Baltimore. And when you purchase that copy, make sure that you also purchase a second copy that she will send to somebody who is incarcerated. So thank you all. And we will see you next week on Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Get out there and do the next right thing. Thanks, Erin.